I had a great relationship with that sales representative, but I bought from her competitor because they offered better value. A senior customer feels no remorse in saying this. For decades, the sales industry diligently expanded techniques, perfected processes, developed technology, and refined soft skills. You were taught how to listen more, ask more cleverly, and build deeper trust with the inherent belief that good sales is relationship-based sales. But what if that's no longer true? What if the very thing that seems most humane and noble in sales, the relationship, is being completely decoupled from the buying decision? What if customers don't need a close friend, but rather someone bold enough to challenge their thinking? And if that's the case, who will dare to be the first to stand up and tell customers that they are misunderstanding their own problems? We sought that answer not through intuition, but through data from over 6,000 salespeople across hundreds of global companies, spanning tens of thousands of real-world deals. And what we discovered not only startled many sales executives, but compelled them to redefine the role of the salesperson in this era. The book you are about to hear, The Challenger, doesn't promise quick success, but it can lead you to a profound truth. To become an excellent salesperson, you cannot pander to the market. You must know how to challenge it with knowledge, critical thinking, and courage. Now, let's begin summarizing this book together. At the time we embarked on this research journey, most people in the sales industry believed they understood quite well what made a good salesperson. The unwritten rules were clear. Listen to the customer, build relationships, understand their problems, then offer a suitable solution. A successful salesperson wasn't someone who talked a lot, but someone who knew how to ask the right questions, prompting customers to reveal their own issues, then gently guiding them to the correct answer. That was the core of solution selling, which had been the industry's gold standard for decades. But something began to feel out of sync. A quiet but noticeable dissonance. A vague feeling that many business leaders sensed. The old way of selling was gradually losing its effectiveness, not because salespeople were doing anything wrong, but because buyers had changed. In the past, the salesperson was the bearer of knowledge. Customers needed to know what was available on the market, which solutions were appropriate, which products were trustworthy, and the salesperson was the bridge between the outside world and the internal workings of the company. The salesperson was once the expert, the consultant, the guide. But in today's information age, everything has reversed. Customers no longer wait for advice. They research in advance, read blogs, attend webinars, check reviews, analyze competitors, and often define up to 60% of their buying journey before ever contacting a salesperson. By the time they agree to meet, they don't need anyone to uncover their problems. They believe they already understand the issues and even know what they need to buy. This is precisely the bottleneck. Because if you meet a customer who already has a predefined opinion and you merely confirm what they already think, you're not adding any value. You're just a validator, not a change agent. And sadly, in thousands of surveys and interviews we conducted, sales executives admitted that their sales teams, despite being well-trained in solution selling, frequently fell into the trap of accommodating the customer's existing mindset instead of challenging it. The story truly began to change when we started categorizing salesperson types, not to label or pigeonhole them, but to identify if any specific type was excelling in this new landscape. And the answer was yes. Among the thousands of salespeople surveyed, 5 distinct behavioral profiles emerged. These profiles were not the result of subjective assumptions, but came from a robust statistical analysis model. We named them the hardworker, the relationship builder, the lone wolf, the problem solver, and the challenger. While most sales managers, and perhaps even you, might assume the relationship builder is the ideal archetype, the data revealed the exact opposite. Relationship builders were not the highest performers. In fact, they often had the lowest performance in complex deals. Conversely, challengers, those who consistently challenge customers' thinking, bring new perspectives, and aren't afraid to debate to create value, are precisely the most outstanding, consistent, and impactful salespeople in influencing purchasing decisions. The biggest question wasn't just why they succeeded, but whether this model could be replicated. We knew that if we could clarify this, if we could transform the challenger's special DNA into a teachable and deployable formula, it would be a turning point for the entire sales industry. But we also knew that to convince an industry accustomed to solution selling for over 30 years, we needed more than data. We needed to tell a truly compelling, incisive, and undeniable story to lead people to the conclusion that it was time for a change. There's one thing I'll never forget: the look in the eyes of a seasoned sales executive when we presented our research findings. He sat silently for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the chart displaying the Challenger Group's superiority. Then he slowly looked up and said, "So, all my investments in the relationship-building team are yielding inverse results." It wasn't a question, but a profound epiphany. We began peeling back the layers of data. Why did challengers succeed so spectacularly in today's sales environment? And we realized something. Precisely because customers are already confident in their own knowledge, a salesperson who merely confirms what customers think is right will never be seen as a value creator. Conversely, when you can bring a fresh perspective, a more compelling logic, even refuting their initial assumptions, but doing so intelligently and strategically, you instantly become an influencer. You make customers pause, reconsider, and open up to the possibility of change. That is the core skill of a challenger. They teach not just explaining product features, but teaching customers to re-examine their own industry, processes, or business thinking. They are not afraid to tailor their approach, communicating in a way that aligns with each customer's specific frame of reference. And finally, they know how to take control of the conversation, knowing when to lead, when to push the pace, and when to create constructive tension to drive decisions. I remember once during an interview, we met a salesperson who was the top performer in his region. When asked what he did differently from others, he simply smiled and said, "I don't come to ask customers what they need. I come to show them what they haven't thought of yet." That simple yet incisive statement cemented itself in our minds. In an environment where information is no longer an advantage, perspective is the weapon. The sales industry is transforming. It's no longer a game for those who skillfully maintain relationships, no longer a place for agreeable folks who entertain clients, buy coffee, and believe friendliness opens doors to contracts. Instead, it's a place for those with strategic thinking, the courage to challenge, and the ability to create profound influence. However, we knew many would object. They'd say customers don't like being challenged, or that this model only works in tech. But when we expanded our research to over 90 companies in various industries from industrial manufacturing, financial services, to healthcare and energy, one thing became clear. In any industry with a complex sales cycle, where buyers need to analyze, deliberate, and make strategic decisions, challengers consistently led the pack. And that was a shock to managers who had invested millions of dollars in old-school sales training programs. They weren't wrong. The world had just changed faster than they anticipated. I am not writing these words to abolish solution selling. No, in many cases, solutions are still important. But what needs to change is who leads the journey to find the solution. Is it the customer with their assumptions, or is it the salesperson with a deeper, broader perspective? And if you want to build a truly strong sales team in this new world, you can't just look for agreeable, diligent, and good listeners. You need people who dare to challenge, dare to debate, and know how to make customers reconsider their own beliefs. This story of a quiet yet fierce transformation in the sales industry will continue. Are you managing a team that panders to customers, or one that truly influences them? Because ultimately, in a world where products are increasingly similar and technology easily replicated, how you sell, not what you sell, will be your most sustainable competitive advantage. If you've ever had the chance to sit in a high-level sales meeting at large corporations, you'd easily feel the underlying urgency in the air. No one says it out loud, but everyone's eyes reveal a shared worry. Why is team performance still lagging? Why do we still rely on a few stars to meet targets? And how can we break the cycle of 80% of sales coming from 20% of people? Those were the questions that we, the initiators of the Challenger research, faced from the very beginning. But instead of searching for a magical formula out there, we chose a different path, looking directly at reality, digging deep into real data, and letting the salespeople themselves tell their story through their behaviors. And that's when the 5 behavioral profiles began to take clear shape. Imagine you're observing a large sales floor, where there are all sorts of personalities, styles, and skills. Gradually, you realize that although hundreds of people have hundreds of different approaches to customers, if you look closely, you can group them into 5 main types 5 sales personalities, not in the sense of MBTI classifications or astrology, but as practical behavioral models based on data from thousands of transactions and in-depth interviews. The first is asterisk the hard worker asterisk asterisk, diligent, persistent, always arriving early and leaving late. They believe success comes from effort. They love feedback and constantly seek self-improvement. You'll find them sending the most emails, making the most calls, and eager to learn from every mistake. If you were a manager, this is someone you'd want on your team because they are easy to manage and always enthusiastic. The second is asterisk the relationship builder asterisk, focused on connections. They are very skillful in communication, know how to make customers feel comfortable, and invest heavily in building trust. They are well liked by customers. They avoid conflict, always seek common ground, and believe people buy from those they like. They are good at building long-term relationships and are often seen as company brand ambassadors. Third is asterisk the lone wolf asterisk asterisk, fiercely independent. They are extremely self-confident, have their own style, and frequently break process. They do things their way and often succeed in unexpected ways. Managers both like and fear them. They aren't easy to collaborate with, but their results are undeniable. Fourth is asterisk asterisk the problem solver asterisk, highly reliable, always ready to assist customers when issues arise. They are technically adept, know their products thoroughly, and are seen as saviors whenever customers need help. Customers love them, and companies need them. But most of the time, they react rather than proactively initiate. And finally, the central character of our study, the challenger asterisk asterisk. From the outset, the challenger stood out. They are unlike anyone else. They don't come to ask customers what they want, but to tell customers what they asterisk should asterisk want. They bring a new perspective, an analytical model, or a bold assumption. They don't avoid conflict, but know how to use it to create influence. They teach customers, tailor messages, and skillfully take control of the conversation. But what makes challengers most remarkable isn't just that they're good. It's that their effectiveness is replicable. This means when you dissect their behavior, you find a structure, a logic that can be trained. And that's good news for any organization looking to break free from dependence on a few born superstars. However, what astonished leaders most was the performance ranking by group. Can you guess who came out on top? Yes, the challenger, and not just at the top, but far ahead of the second-place group. And who was at the bottom of the list? The relationship builder, the very type that most organizations prioritize for recruitment, training, and reward. You might find it hard to believe, so did we, but the data doesn't lie. So why are challengers so exceptionally effective? Imagine you're a purchasing manager. Every week you meet a parade of salespeople, each telling you how wonderful their product is, how attentive their customer service. Then one day, someone walks into your office and says, "The way you're currently buying this product is costing your company millions of dollars a year." You're surprised. You ask why. They pull out an industry analysis, pinpointing bottlenecks in your supply chain, proposing a bold alternative that no one else has ever mentioned. What do you think? You might not buy immediately, but you'll definitely remember that person. And if what they say is logical, you'll start rethinking your own operations. That's the moment a challenger makes a difference. Let's pause at that moment. The challenger salesperson walks into the meeting room and forces the customer to rethink all their assumptions. Not because they speak louder or present prettier slides, but because they bring a perspective the customer cannot ignore. This isn't just selling, it's leadership, it's thought leadership. And in a volatile world, that's what buyers need more than a friendly handshake. We delved deeper into the deals challengers closed, and a 3-step model gradually emerged. Teach, tailor, take control. First is asterisk teach asterisk asterisk, but not in the way of a product presentation. They teach in a way that makes customers realize a new truth about the market, about how they operate, and about untapped opportunities. They bring insights, not just information, and they tell a story rather than reading a data sheet. They lead customers to a conclusion. If I don't change, I'll be left behind. The second step is asterisk tailor asterisk. meaning they don't bring the same story to everyone. They understand the industry, the role, and the specific frame of reference of each person in the meeting. They speak to the CFO in one way and to the COO in another. They know that a story only has power when the listener feels a personal connection to it. The final step, and one that relationship builders often avoid, is take control. Challengers don't hesitate to set expectations, subtly establish authority, and guide customers through a directed decision-making process. They don't passively wait for customers to consider further. They actively evoke a sense of urgency and push for action. They manage the pace, rather than waiting. Some might say this sounds like pressuring customers, not quite. Challengers don't coerce with power. They persuade with logic and insight. They make customers want to move forward, not because they're being pushed, but because they see a better future ahead. And perhaps the most interesting thing is that challengers don't necessarily have to be the best talkers in the room, or the most senior, or even the best at building relationships. They just need three things: a valuable perspective, a flexible ability to tailor, and a responsible spirit of control. This opens a pivotal question. If this model is truly effective, can others be trained to become challengers? We believe so. Because while relationship builders often rely on innate personality traits like agreeableness and charm, challengers rely on behaviors that can be built. You can coach someone to deeply understand the market, to tell an impactful story, to ask guiding questions, and to subtly control a conversation. Of course, not everyone can become a challenger overnight, but the important thing is that this is not innate talent. It's a skill that can be developed. And when you understand that, you no longer feel helpless about the asymmetry between top performers and the rest. We once met a global VP of sales who, after reviewing the challenger analysis, quietly said, "I thought my best people were unreplicable exceptions. Now I know they are the new standard." And that's the moment you see an industry begin to transform. We'll delve into how to coach, build, and deploy the challenger model in practice. But first and foremost, it's crucial for you as a sales leader to answer this question. What are you building your team on? Agreeableness, subservience, or the ability to create profound influence? Because in today's sales environment, you cannot win by merely reacting to demand. You must create new demand, and that is the only game where challengers consistently lead. There's something every sales manager knows, but not everyone dares to say out loud. The majority of their sales team are not stars. Not everyone has the innate talent to break sales records. Most are steady performers, good enough not to be cut from the game, but not exceptional enough to be game changers. We call them core performers, those who lie in the middle of the performance curve, and they are the largest force in any sales team. If an organization relies solely on 10% of stars to drive 80% of sales, what happens if one of them leaves, or worse, if a competitor tempts them with a higher commission? The organization would be in peril. And that's why any sales improvement truly creates a breakthrough only when it can be scaled to the core group. The question then arises, can an average performer, without the strong personality of a lone wolf or the innate strategic thinking of a challenger, be trained to act like a challenger? The answer, after hundreds of surveys and real-world trials, is yes. But for the challenger model to spread, there's a crucial condition. You cannot simply give them a list of techniques. You must change their fundamental mindset. Many organizations fall into a trap. They see the challenger group's success and think, "Aha, I just need to teach everyone to talk like them." So, they create slides, write scripts, and make everyone memorize insight-generating stories, but the results are dismal and sometimes counterproductive. Why? Because you can't just copy surface behavior. You have to start from within. Let's take an example. In a tech company, the star salespeople, the true challengers, often open meetings with a rather shocking statement. If your company continues to deploy software in the old way, you're losing at least 15% of your profit margin annually. Customers are startled, and they listen. Not because the statement is sensational, but because the speaker has sufficient preparation, data, and credibility to say it. When an average salesperson tries to imitate that statement without context, preparation, or a true understanding of the underlying logic, customers will feel offended or dismissive. The problem isn't the statement. It's the foundation of thinking that leads to that statement. Therefore, the first step in rolling out the challenger model to the entire team is not technical training, but clarifying the objective. We are not here to sell products, nor to please customers, but to change how customers see their world. That is the new mission of the salesperson. When the objective is clear, new behaviors can align correctly. At an industrial manufacturing company, we supported their team in implementing Challenger coaching over 18 months. Initially, the results were not very promising. Salespeople struggled with the customer teaching scenarios and mostly failed. They said, "We feel like we're pretending." And indeed they were, because they didn't truly believe in their new role yet. It took 6 months of retraining, involving direct exposure of the team to the strategy department, market research, and industry economic data, before they began to form genuine insights. From then on, when they spoke, customers no longer doubted but began to listen, and performance gradually increased. When a core performer started telling a client how data analysis showed companies in their industry were changing their operating strategies, that wasn't just a technique. That was the challenger mindset taking root. To guide an ordinary person on the journey to becoming a challenger, traditional training where salespeople only learn to react to situations won't work. You can't teach them to react, you must teach them to lead. And to lead, they need a new frame of reference, a different view of their own role. Instead of seeing themselves as order takers, they must believe they are helping customers rethink. Instead of asking, "What do you need?" they must learn to ask, "Why are you doing it the old way?" This demands confidence, but above all, genuine inner strength, not the kind disguised by pretty slides or a powerful voice. At a financial services conglomerate, we once trained their sales team using the Challenger model with a 6-month program focused on 3 key areas: industry understanding, insight, and persuasive storytelling. We didn't start with products. We started by teaching them to analyze the customer's business environment, industry trends, financial pressures, and hidden risks. Then, from that foundation, they learned to develop a leading narrative where they didn't present products but told a story that led customers to conclude, "I need to change." Initially, many felt uncomfortable. One veteran salesperson once said, "I'm used to talking about products. Now I have to talk about their industry. I feel like I'm overstepping." But then, when they applied it, something surprising happened. Customers started listening more. And not just listening, they began asking questions. The attention shifted. Salespeople were no longer reactive, they were leading. And what's remarkable is that this transformation didn't just happen at the individual level. When the entire team began acting like challengers, the sales ecosystem also changed. The marketing department no longer produced generic brochures, but had to create specific insights for each industry. The product department didn't just listen to customer needs, but actively framed problems. Even management had to change their coaching style, no longer checking pipelines, but training on strategic interaction. Introducing Challenger to the core workforce isn't about labeling, it's a sales culture overhaul. But this isn't an easy path. There will be resistance, especially from those who are doing well the old way. They'll ask, "Why change when I'm still hitting my targets?" The answer is because the world is changing and buyers are becoming more demanding. If you don't help them think differently, someone else will, and they'll win your customers over. Remember, the ultimate goal of implementing the Challenger model isn't to create a few better salespeople, but to create a smarter sales organization, one where every customer conversation is an opportunity to change, to lead, and to build trust based on intellectual capacity, not just agreeableness. Throughout the journey of researching and training this model, I've witnessed ordinary teams become extraordinary, not thanks to innate talent, but thanks to a shift in how they see the world and how they choose to enter each conversation with a goal higher than sales, helping customers see what they've never seen before. If you're leading a sales team, ask yourself, are you encouraging them to pander to customers or to challenge their thinking? Are you building order takers or pathfinders? Because in this volatile world, customers don't need more people who agree with them. They need someone with the courage to say, "I understand what you're thinking, but there's another way, and I'll show you why it's worth considering." Imagine you're a typical B2B customer in operations, finance, or technology director preparing for a crucial purchasing decision. What did you do before meeting a salesperson? You read documentation, researched competitors, asked colleagues, checked reviews, compared prices, and even framed a solution yourself. You walk into the meeting with the salesperson in a state of, I know what I need. And this is where the tragedy begins. The salesperson walks in and starts probing. What difficulties are you facing? What do you want to improve? Then they showcase product features. If you're the customer, what would you think? Most would think, I already know all this. You're not telling me anything new. This is the trap of modern sales. The salesperson thinks they're adding value, but in reality, they're merely confirming what the customer already knows. And that's why many meetings end without leaving any impression. That's why, if you want to truly differentiate your sales approach, you must teach the customer something new. The question is what to teach. Certainly not about the product, nor generally about the industry, but rather a new way for the customer to see their own business, how they operate, how they purchase, how they position themselves competitively. And most importantly, teach them to recognize a problem they never considered before, but which, once seen, they cannot help but act upon. We call this insight. This might sound like market education, but it's not quite. Market education is usually one way and general. A true challenger insight is a sharp, challenging, yet incredibly specific perspective that makes the customer feel like they've just had an epiphany. Take a logistics service provider, for example. Instead of asking customers how they want to shorten delivery times, they start with an analysis. 95% of companies in your industry are currently designing their supply chains to optimize costs, but that's causing them to lose orders to faster delivering competitors. Then they ask, do you know the opportunity cost for every hour of delayed delivery? The customer is stunned because they've never thought about it that way. And now they're drawn into a conversation where the salesperson is leading, not following. You differentiate not through your product, but through your perspective. This is a major paradigm shift in sales thinking. Most companies invest in product training, ensuring their sales teams deeply understand features, benefits, and competitive advantages. But customers don't care about features, they care about their problems. And unless you connect your product to a problem they haven't seen, your product is just one of dozens of options they can Google. And here's the interesting paradox. In a world where everything is increasingly transparent, differentiation comes from something no one can find online: your unique perspective. At a software company, we once saw an average salesperson achieve phenomenal results in 6 months, simply by changing how she started meetings. Instead of asking, what difficulties are you facing? She'd say, we've just completed a survey with 200 companies in your industry, and there's a common factor causing them to incur hidden costs of up to 12%. I'm not sure if your company is in that group, but I can show you how to check in 5 minutes. The customer immediately paid attention, not because she was talking endlessly, but because she started with intriguing data and opened a door for the customer to discover their own problem. That's the art, teaching customers something they don't know, but in a way that makes them feel they discovered it themselves. There's a bitter paradox in modern sales. The more information there is, the harder it is for buyers to make decisions. They don't lack data, they lack direction. They don't need another feature comparison chart, they need a reason to see the world differently. And that's when you, the challenger salesperson, step in. The key here isn't just having an insight, but choosing which insight to share. A good insight doesn't just surprise, it must be tied to the ability to act, and that action must lead back to your unique strength. If you only teach customers fascinating things that aren't relevant to how you can help them, you've just trained a competitor for free. Imagine you discover a company is losing profit margins because their resource allocation is inefficient. You point out the problem, provide data, and make them realize the flaw. If you don't have a concrete solution, or if that solution isn't something you provide, you've just done someone else's job. Therefore, an insight is only truly powerful when it opens up a new need that you are best equipped to fulfill. We call this teaching to differentiate, and it's the core strategy of every challenger salesperson. It's not about teaching customers to no, but teaching them to want to act in the way you lead. There's a question we often use to test if an insight is strong enough. After hearing it, does the customer say, I've never thought of that? If so, you've succeeded in the first step. But if they then say, what should I do now? That's the golden moment. They are ready to change. And that's when you show them how to change and why only you can do it right. One of the most common mistakes sales teams make is confusing insight with data. They think simply presenting a market report or a trend analysis is enough. But insight isn't dry information. It's a perspective narrated as a story, linked to a specific business consequence, and presented at the right time to the right person. Imagine you're talking to a CFO. You start by painting a picture of how companies in their industry are spending money using old models and why that's no longer effective in the current environment. Then you tell a story about a customer who changed their budget allocation and saved 20% on operating costs. And finally, you connect it. We've built a tool to help you check if your current model is causing hidden waste. Would you like to try it? This is no longer selling, it's leading change. And customers no longer see you as a vendor. They see you as a strategic resource. The interesting thing is, when you teach customers to think differently, you don't have to compete on price. Because price only becomes an issue when products are perceived as equivalent. When you redefine the problem, you simultaneously redefine the value. In an internal study, we found that deals led by challengers were able to command prices up to 14% higher without resistance, simply because customers believed they were buying something completely different. And this happened not because the product was different, but because the story was different. So if you're building a sales team, start with the question, is the story you're telling compelling enough to make customers change how they see the world? If not, no matter how good your product is, you'll just be one salesperson among many. I once asked a major client, "What made you choose this salesperson instead of the other three?" He replied very quickly, "He didn't ask me what I needed. He showed me what I was missing, and that's when I understood." The true power of a challenger lies in the ability to see what others haven't thought of, and to dare to articulate it. Have you ever stood before a client, slides in hand, head full of data, heart full of expectation, but just a few minutes later, you notice the other person's eyes glazing over? Their mind drifts somewhere between their to-do list and lunch. If you've experienced that, you'll understand that insight doesn't have power on its own. The power lies in asterisk how you tell the story. Differentiation doesn't come from product features, but from how you help customers re-examine their own business in a different way. Now it's time to delve deeper. How do you lead a challenger-style conversation? A conversation that makes customers sit up straight, take notes, and exclaim, "I've never thought of that." We call it commercial teaching, a very special kind of teaching. It's not like academic instruction. The goal isn't for customers to simply know more, but for them to feel the need asterisk to change and to act in the direction you lead. And to do that, you can't present like a salesperson. You must tell stories like a strategic thought leader. A challenger-style conversation always begins with a hidden pain point, something the customer either doesn't see or sees but misunderstands. But you can't just blurt out, "The way you're doing it is wrong." That doesn't create influence, it creates resistance. Instead, you need a subtle guidance, where you gradually peel back layers of perception with evidence, examples, and logic, leading the customer to conclude for themselves that something is wrong here. This journey typically goes through 6 steps. 1. The warm-up, ***, building initial rapport, not just with the person, but with the problem. 2. The reframe, ***, where you overturn the customer's familiar assumptions, opening up a new perspective. 3. Rational drowning, ***, you present sharp data and arguments to highlight the severity of the problem. 4. Emotional impact, ***, you connect that problem to real business consequences, perhaps lost revenue, departing customers, or missed opportunities. 5. A new way, ***, this is when you introduce a different approach, a new strategy. 6. Your solution, ***, finally, you show that your product or service is the tool to realize that strategy. Many salespeople make the mistake of reversing this order. They start with the solution and hope the customer will be interested. But customers are only interested when they perceive the problem to be significant enough to warrant change. If you haven't made them feel the pain, no matter how good your solution is, it's just an unsolicited offer. Imagine you're selling supply chain management software. Instead of opening with, "Our software has features A, B, and C," you start with a shocking truth. 80% of companies like yours are currently optimizing for the wrong goals in their supply chain. Then you tell a real story. A company just like yours lost 12% of its revenue because it optimized for cost instead of optimizing for speed of market response. You're not saying they're wrong, you're showing them how someone similar stumbled. And then you ask, is your current model heading in that direction? In that very moment, as the customer pauses in thought, you've begun to lead. But you still haven't introduced your product. You continue by presenting a new framework. Leading companies are changing their KPIs, measuring their supply chains differently, and this is creating a real competitive advantage. Only when the customer asks, "So what do I need to do?" Asterisk, then you offer your solution. This is a crucial point that many salespeople miss. Don't rush to talk about the product. Let the customer articulate the need first, but it's a need that you've just activated, not something they came to the meeting with initially. Because if you're only solving problems they already know, you're entering an auction. But if you're the one who creates the need, you set the rules of the game. There's a huge difference between solving problems and defining problems. Challengers don't wait for customers to vocalize their pain. They strategically create a discomfort, not to make things difficult, but to help customers break free from outdated assumptions that are limiting them. And to do that, you need to practice like a professional storyteller. In many training programs, we don't start with writing emails or preparing slides. We start by practicing telling an insight story, a logical sequence from market facts to business consequences, leading to action, and finally, to the solution. If a salesperson can't tell that story clearly, persuasively, and with emotion, they're not ready to meet customers. Because customers don't change because they're forced. They change when they see a different, better future and they believe you can take them there. Remember, in a challenger-style conversation, you control without being overbearing, you lead without being autocratic, and you create the feeling that the customer is discovering, even though you hold the map. A sales manager we once worked with made a great point. When my team learned to tell stories using the Challenger framework, I noticed customers no longer just nodded. They started leaning forward. That's the signal that you've touched something truly important. But it must be said, not every customer will react positively right away. Some will find your challenging of their assumptions uncomfortable. Some will become defensive, and some will say, "We're doing just fine." That's why you need both. A compelling story and the courage not to back down after the first rejection. Because challengers don't seek consensus, they seek epiphany. And epiphany, as we know, is rarely a comfortable process. So how do you implement this at scale? How can every salesperson on the team tell the right story in the right way? The answer isn't a slide deck. It's insightography, the choreography of teaching customers. It's the process of designing each step of the interaction. How to open, how to ask questions, how to present data, how to create surprise, and how to transition from pain to solution. In the most successful companies, implementing the challenger model, marketing, strategy, and sales departments sit together to intentionally design each insight story. They don't delegate the task of teaching customers to individual salespeople. Instead, they provide them with a thinking script not to parrot, but to understand, believe, and personalize in their own style. Because ultimately, customers don't just buy products. They buy the belief that the person sitting across from them understands their world more deeply than they do themselves. And you can only build that belief when you dare to step forward, not with a price quote, but with a story that changes their perspective. You're telling an incredibly compelling story, with clear facts, sharp arguments, and a coherent logical structure. But after you finish, the person across from you only gives a polite nod. Why? Not because the story is bad, but because it doesn't connect with what that person cares about. This is a fatal mistake many salespeople make. They have a great insight but tell it to the wrong person, in the wrong way, at the wrong time. And that's why tailoring is a critical skill in challenger selling. No single message fits all. A story that doesn't make the listener feel, "This relates to me," will just be background noise. No matter how eloquently you speak, we live in an age of information overload. Buyers don't lack data, they lack something worth caring about. And the only thing that makes them care is themselves, their job, their pressures, their goals. So how do you tell the same insight story, but make it resonate differently in the mind of each listener? Start with this simple truth. Everyone in the decision-making process has their own filter. A CFO listens through the lens of costs, risks, and ROI. A marketing director listens through the lens of brand, customers, and growth. An operations director listens through efficiency, time, and process effectiveness. And you often tell the story from the product's perspective, and that's why you fail. The art here is not to change the insight itself, but to change how you package it and how you introduce it to resonate with the listener's priorities. Let's take an example. You have an insight that the supply chain is optimizing for the wrong goals, reducing its ability to respond to market fluctuations. If you're talking to a CFO, you might open with, the trade-off between inventory costs and the opportunity cost of lost revenue is being miscalculated. We have data showing companies that drastically cut inventory often lose orders during sudden market surges. If you're talking to an operations director, you might say, the just-in-time model is creating dangerous bottlenecks in the supply chain, reducing resilience. If you're talking to a CEO, you might lead with, pioneering companies are no longer seeing the supply chain as a cost center, but as a competitive weapon for speed. 3 people, 1 story, 3 different introductions. That's tailoring. But tailoring isn't just about speaking the right language. It's about hitting the right emotions, the right pressures, the right unspoken desires. To do that, you need to do 2 things. First, deeply research not just the company, but the individual you're about to speak with. Check their LinkedIn, read interviews, see what they've talked about. If they've said, "We prioritize innovation," start your story with logic showing how current practices are stifling innovation. They've emphasized risk control, lead with an example of loss due to misguided optimization. Second, learn to read between the lines during meetings. When someone sighs when a KPI is mentioned, that's a clue. When they turn to look at their assistant when you say, digital transformation, that's a signal. You're not just listening to words, you're listening to the fears and ambitions behind the words. And once you catch those signals, you can subtly reorient your story without losing the core insight. Tailoring isn't about pandering, it's about designing persuasion. And like any good architecture, it starts by understanding where the stresses lie. When a challenger salesperson walks into a meeting with a tailored story, they don't say what asterisk they know, they say what the listener asterisk secretly needs to hear asterisk. And that's not a guessing game, it's the result of highly intentional preparation. In teams successfully implementing the challenger model, preparing for a meeting isn't just about memorizing insights or data. It's an entire process of designing the conversation. The salesperson must answer questions like, what metrics is the person I'm about to meet measured by? Where have they recently failed? What pressures are they under from their superiors? And most importantly, what reason do they have to fear not changing? Because the truth is, people don't change because they understand. They change because they asterisk feel. And that feeling comes from your story hitting a nerve, not a logical nerve, but the nerve of reality, of professional pride, of the fear of missing out or falling behind. We once worked with a sales team in the healthcare sector. They were selling new technology to increase accuracy in diagnostic imaging. The product was excellent, but sales were very low. The reason? They were telling the wrong story to the wrong person. They met with hospital directors and presented accuracy. But that director was measured by patient throughput speed and cost per examination. When we helped them tailor the message, not changing the insight, but changing how it connected, with this technology, you can reduce diagnosis time by 20% and increase cases per day without adding machines. The results dramatically changed. Because now the story wasn't about technology, it was about management efficiency. A correct story delivered in the wrong place becomes invisible. Tailoring also requires sensitivity to roles in the decision-making process. In most B2B deals, the decision-maker isn't one person but a group. And each person in that group listens through a different mental filter. Therefore, a skilled challenger salesperson doesn't just tell one story, they tell multiple versions of the same logic, designed to resonate with each influencer. They might start with the technical director, clarifying current risks, then make the finance director feel the opportunity cost, and finally give the CEO a strategic vision of how to outperform competitors. And all of that leads back to the same point, their asterisk solution. You might call this the one insight, many pathways technique. But to do that, you need to cultivate the ability to interpret flexibly without losing the original message. Like a skilled jazz musician, no matter how they improvise, the main melody remains clear. And above all, you must truly believe in what you're saying. Because customers might not hear every word, but they always sense the energy in your delivery. If you're just performing a script, they'll know. If you genuinely believe you're showing them something they've never thought of, they'll know that too. So, tailoring isn't about saying what customers want to hear. It's the art of telling them what they need to hear in a way that makes them want to listen. When you achieve that, a miracle happens. Instead of straining to persuade, you see customers start to nod, not because they're convinced, but because they see what you're saying is exactly what they were thinking, but could never articulate so clearly. And in that moment, you're no longer just a salesperson, you're a strategic partner. A common scenario: you've told an incredibly compelling story. The customer nods, their eyes light up, they're taking notes continuously. You leave the meeting feeling like this deal is closed, but then nothing happens. Follow-up emails go unanswered. The next meeting is postponed. When you call back, you hear the familiar phrase, "We're still considering." And just like that, a beautiful opportunity with real potential slips into oblivion. That's not a failure of insight, it's a failure of control. Don't misunderstand. Control in this context isn't manipulation, coercion, or pressure. Control is the ability to actively guide the decision-making process to ensure it doesn't get stuck in invisible loops where customers are paralyzed by their own systems. Many technically proficient salespeople falter at this stage. They believe that if they provide enough information, customers will make decisions on their own. But the truth is, customers don't lack information, they lack the courage to act. And your role, precisely, is to help them overcome that bottleneck. We call this selling with constructive tension, not the kind of tension that makes people uncomfortable, but the kind that makes them unable to return to their old state. Take an example. You show a customer that if they don't change their current model, they'll lose 8% of their profit margin annually. They understand that, but understanding isn't enough. They need you to help them convert that understanding into action by setting specific timelines, establishing clear responsibilities, and not allowing delay to be reasonably rationalized. A challenger salesperson isn't afraid to ask tough questions. Who needs final approval? How long have you or your team postponed similar changes in the past? What will happen if this isn't implemented 6 months from now? Not to confuse customers, but to make them truly confront the inertia within their own organization. And the magic is, customers don't hate this. On the contrary, they thank you because too few people are frank, clear, and decisive enough to help them see the reality. We once met a salesperson in the security software field, a naturally quiet and gentle person. But in a meeting with a major bank's IT team, he did something unexpected. After presenting the solution, he looked directly at the decision-making group and said, "I understand you have many other priorities, but if we don't start the implementation process within the next 30 days, the risks we just analyzed won't disappear. They'll just arrive without warning." Silence. Then one person in the group said, "He's right, we should finalize the roadmap now." That's the power of a timely reminder. If you have the courage to speak up and want to maintain control, you must understand the nature of the customer organization's decision-making process. It's not as simple as buy if you like. It's a labyrinth with many voices, subtle pressures, and countless seemingly reasonable traps for delay. So a challenger salesperson doesn't just sell to one person. They manage a complex buying journey by always knowing who truly has the power to decide, who influences but isn't present, who quietly opposes, and who is waiting for others to decide for them. And above all, they know that silence is never a good sign. If customers stop responding, it's not because they're too busy, but because they're stuck somewhere. And if you don't help them get unstuck, someone else will. Control in sales doesn't mean you always have to be the most talkative person in the room. On the contrary, it often comes from the ability to be silent at the right moment after a powerful question, forcing the other person to truly think, or from a serious gaze when you say, "If we don't set a deadline, we're allowing everyone to drift by inertia." In the best sales teams, we see a common trait. They don't shy away from strategic discomfort. That is, they are willing to create uncomfortable but necessary moments to move customers forward. Because they understand you can't be both a pleaser and a mindset changer. There was an interesting study that analyzed over 1,000 sales calls. We found that calls with a higher ratio of positive, tension moments we're typically twice as likely to close successfully. The reason is that in those moments, customers leave their cognitive comfort zone and begin to reevaluate their decisions. But here's the crucial point. No control can exist without trust. You can only challenge someone when they believe you're doing it for their benefit, not yours. Therefore, challengers aren't just tough, they're also very subtle in building credibility before creating tension. They never start a conversation by coursing. They build value, demonstrate understanding, provide insight, and then dare to ask for action. And that action is always very specific. An appointment, a specific person who needs to participate, a step that needs confirmation. They don't leave a meeting with a vague promise to consider more. They leave with a small agreement to move closer to the big agreement. In one training session, I asked a sales team, when was the last time you asked a client to commit to a specific next step? The room fell silent. Then someone said, we're afraid of annoying them. And that's the problem. Fearing the loss of a relationship means losing the deal altogether. You can't be a guide if you're afraid to ask for directions, and you can't lead a deal if you're afraid to ask customers for commitment. Remember, customers are also looking for certainty. They don't want to be forced, but they want to be guided. They are swimming in an ocean of information, internal pressures, and conflicting priorities. If you just stand on the shore and shout, I have a great product, they won't listen. But if you swim out, show them the way, and say, follow me, many will. That's the difference between an old-school salesperson who waits for the customer to decide and a challenger who helps the customer decide. Because ultimately, you're not paid to present, you're paid to make things happen. Then one day, you're a sales manager. You've just endured a high-pressure quarterly meeting, sales targets aren't being met, and leadership is asking why the good performers are still selling well, but the rest aren't improving. You know the answer. You've read about the challenger model. You understand why those who can create insights, tailor messages, and take control of the process achieve superior performance. But now you face a tougher challenge. How do you roll out that model to the entire team? Because in reality, a model is only powerful when it's widespread. And the central figure in that process isn't the training team, but the frontline manager. The frontline manager is the only one with enough direct contact, enough authority, and enough proximity to truly change team behavior. But whether they do it and how is another story. In our research, a familiar pattern repeated itself whenever an organization adopted the challenger model. Top stars quickly embraced it. They immediately understood the logic, some even acting like challengers before reading the book. But the rest struggled. And at this point, the manager's role is like an amplifier or a suppressor. A good manager can transform the model into a culture. A poor manager can turn it into an empty slogan. We once interviewed a good salesperson who was struggling with the change. I want to try the challenger approach, but every time I try to challenge a client a little, my boss reminds me to maintain good relationships. I get pulled back into the old model. That's a common trap. Leadership says we need to change, but middle management acts as if everything is business as usual. So, if you are a manager, you cannot just endorse the challenger model. You must become its role model and coach. And that starts by reevaluating your own management mindset. During our research, we identified 3 common types of managers. 1. The resource allocator asterisk. Provides tools, shares materials, and offers support when requested. 2. The cheerleader asterisk. Boosts morale, praises effort, and builds a positive environment. 3. The coach asterisk. Observes specific behaviors, provides detailed feedback, and guides employees beyond their cognitive limits. Only the third group has the ability to help teams transition from old thinking to challenger behavior. A salesperson just returned from a client meeting, having failed to make an impact. A resource allocator manager would ask, do you need any more materials? A cheerleader would say, it's okay, try harder next time. But a true coach would ask, why did you let the customer lead the conversation instead of framing the problem first? Because real coaching isn't about praise, it's about helping people see what they can't see themselves. We once witnessed an excellent manager conduct a coaching session immediately after a salesperson returned from a client meeting. He didn't ask if the deal was closed, nor did he say, next time, remember to talk about the features. Instead, he asked, at what point did you feel you lost the lead in the conversation? And when the salesperson hesitated, He provided specific examples, describing eye contact, gestures, and the pace of the conversation as if he had been right there in the room. That wasn't an audit. It was intelligent mentorship. And remarkably, after 3 months of being coached that way, this salesperson became one of the fastest deal closers on the team. Coaching according to the challenger model isn't about adding skills. It's about restructuring perception and behavior in every real-world situation. And to do that, managers must become challengers themselves, daring to ask tough questions, daring to give honest feedback, and daring to confront discomfort. Many managers hesitate to do this, fearing employees will take offense or leave. But the truth is, good employees don't leave demanding managers. They leave managers who don't help them grow. We discovered striking data. In the fastest-growing sales teams, managers spend an average of 40–60% of their time coaching sales behavior, not on Excel reports, internal meetings, or pipeline tracking. Because they understood that if the team didn't change how they sold, no strategy would succeed. And once coaching is implemented correctly, it impacts not just individuals but the entire team culture. Everyone starts using the same language. Did you reframe yet? Is my insight story creating enough tension? Did you really control the meeting, or did the client lead you? Those are the signs of a mature challenger organization, where challenging thinking is no longer individual behavior but collective identity. So, how can managers begin? 1. Learn to observe specifically. Don't judge based on results, but on actual behavior in client interactions. 2. Focus on the 3 core skills. Teach, tailor, control, and identify where their employees are weak. 3. Become a role model. Don't just talk about challenger. Embody the challenger mindset in your own management. Dare to be direct, dare to lead, and dare to demand behavioral change. 4. Measure behavioral change, not just sales figures. Remember, a good salesperson can close a deal, but a good challenger manager can create a whole generation of different salespeople. And in a world where technology, products, and processes can all be copied, leadership capability and sales mindset are something that cannot be replicated. We once believed that simply introducing the challenger model to sales teams would automatically yield results. That if you told a sufficiently incisive story and provided compelling enough data, everyone would understand and follow. But reality taught us something more important. Understanding a model is easy. Implementing it is the real battle. Working with pioneering organizations, from tech companies to traditional manufacturing giants, we witnessed every reaction, from enthusiasm to resistance, from initial glory to exhaustion. And in that process, 3 major lessons gradually emerged, not from theory, but from blood, sweat, and missed Q3 targets. Lesson 1, don't start with the entire team. Start with a small, strategic group. Many organizations make the same mistake. They hold company-wide workshops, hand out materials, cheer, and then expect everyone to transform themselves. That doesn't happen. The truth is, changing behavior, especially sales behavior, is a process that requires repetition, monitoring, coaching, and close observation. Successful companies often do the opposite. They select a pilot group, typically 15–30 people, with diverse skills, markets, and personalities. This group doesn't need to be all stars, but it needs managers willing to be hands-on coaches. They test the challenger model in specific situations, noting what works, what causes resistance, and refining the narrative for each industry and customer segment. By doing so, after 90 days, they don't just have results. They have real people, real situations, and real data to tell the rest of the organization. And like all cultural changes, internal stories are a more powerful rallying tool than any presentation. Lesson 2, not all insights are the right insights. When teams began to apply commercial teaching, something strange happened. Many thought that simply presenting interesting data was enough to influence. They cited statistics, charts, and forecasts, but failed to generate a drive for change from customers. We were forced to re-ask, what constitutes a truly transformative insight? The answer came from seasoned challenger salespeople. An insight is only powerful when it challenges an old assumption and leads the customer to a specific action tied to your unique value. If an insight is merely interesting but doesn't make the customer feel, I have to do something, then it's just information, not commercial power. An industrial equipment company once shared with us that when they switched from product introductions to teaching with insights, the initial customer reaction was vague. The reason? Their insights were too abstract. They didn't connect to the KPIs or specific pain points of the listener. Only when they learned to link insights to the function, role, and personal objectives of each decision maker did the story begin to hit the nerve of action. Lesson 3. Change cannot be left to training materials alone. It requires a sustained behavioral support system. We've seen many companies enthusiastically launch a challenger model training program, hold 2-day workshops, hand out slide decks and sales scripts, and then end with, "From now on, sell this way." And 3 months later, everything reverted to the old ways, because nothing sustained the new behavior. What made the difference in successful organizations wasn't the initial training program, but the post-training mechanisms. Managers were trained to coach in the challenger style. CRM systems were modified to reflect the stages of the new model. Pipeline meetings shifted from asking, "What's the probability of closing?" to, "Have you created tension yet?" and "Has the customer reframed the problem?" They didn't try to transform the entire system overnight. They incrementally changed daily behavioral touchpoints, and little by little, the new became the familiar. One sales team shared with us, "Previously, we reported by product by number of calls. Now, internal reports require us to record an insight story told this week. Who listened, their reaction, and the next step." Just a small change in measurement behavior, but it caused salespeople to start thinking like strategic storytellers, not just KPI chasers. And after 6 months, sales increased by 23%, not by selling more, but by selling differently. There's an interesting paradox in successful transforming organizations. They don't talk too much about the challenger model. Instead, they let people's behavior tell the story. A story that repeats, spreads, and gradually becomes culture. But here's the crucial point. There is no path to transformation without stumbling. And what distinguishes organizations that move forward from those that falter isn't whether they make mistakes, but how they react to those mistakes. A large tech company once implemented the challenger model globally. The first 3 months saw fierce resistance. Employees objected, managers fumbled, customers didn't understand the new approach. But instead of retreating, they paused, slowed down, adjusted step by step, and most importantly, they listened to the very people who were implementing it. Salespeople were invited to sit at the table with the program designers. Feedback was treated as strategic information, not complaints. And 6 months later, the initial resistors became the leaders, because they saw that this wasn't just a campaign, but a journey they were truly a part of. If you are considering implementing the challenger model, start with that understanding. This isn't a training project. This is a cultural change. And like all cultural changes, it requires time, patience, and an unwavering belief in the ultimate goal. Building a sales organization capable of changing customer perceptions, not with flowery words or pretty ideas, but with deep insights, intelligent challenges, and proactive guidance. That's not just a better way to sell. It's a way to help customers become better versions of themselves. When we began this research, the goal was simply to discover what made a salesperson excel in a tough business environment. But after thousands of interviews, millions of data points, and hundreds of hours of field observation, a surprising truth emerged. The best salespeople don't just sell, they change others. And what they do doesn't stop at the scope of a deal. They enter a conversation with a customer, and instead of pandering or persuading, they ask a question that forces the other person to rethink. And from that moment, they open a new path, not just for the product, but for how the customer operates their entire organization. And then we asked ourselves, if an individual can create such an impact, what would happen if an entire organization acted like a challenger? Imagine, not just the sales department, but marketing, strategy, product development, customer service all embracing the spirit of teaching, tailoring, and taking control. Not to manipulate the market, but to lead the game. A challenger company doesn't ask customers what they want. They ask what customers should want but haven't realized yet. They don't just survey trends, they shape trends. They don't wait for the market to respond, they proactively tell stories that make the market respond. And this can be applied beyond the corporate world. A challenger leader doesn't manage by consensus, they manage by conviction. People can achieve more than they ever believed about themselves if someone dares to challenge them correctly at the right time. A challenger teacher doesn't ask students, "What do you want to learn?" but "What are you misunderstanding, and how can I help you see it differently?" A challenger colleague doesn't avoid conflict. They create space for difficult conversations because they know that's where truth is uncovered. Because ultimately, the challenger is not a sales method. It's a new frame of reference for thinking that the greatest value you can create for others isn't in how well you listen, but in your courage to show them what they've never dared to see. And if you're brave enough to do that, you're not just a salesperson, you're a game changer. One of the most surprising things we realized is that organizations successfully implementing the challenger model all shared one point. They didn't view selling as an endpoint, but as the beginning of a profound shift in how they approach the market. In those companies, the marketing department no longer chased easy leads. They began to design insights. They no longer asked, "How do we generate more clicks?" but "How do we plant a question in the customer's mind that makes them unable to sit still?" Product teams didn't just obsess over adding features. They asked, "Are we truly creating a solution for a problem powerful enough to change the industry?" And when necessary, they bravely removed even beloved features if they didn't lead to real customer change. Even the customer service team, traditionally a place for appeasement, became a place for guidance. They didn't just ask, "How can I help you?" Proactively said, "We've just discovered a way for you to optimize your process by over 15%. Would you like to try it?" That's not a company asterisk running the challenger model. That's a company run as asterisk a challenger. And if you've ever been in meetings there, you'd feel the difference. People don't shy away from tension. They treat it as fuel. They don't avoid debate. They value those who dare to smartly challenge, to point out blind spots, to say, "I think there's a better way." And that's when we understood the most powerful aspect of the challenger model isn't in the sales process. It's in a culture of challenge and thought leadership. A customer once told us, "The reason I chose to work with this company wasn't because they had the best product, but because they made me realize I wasn't doing well enough, and they gave me a reason to change." That's the pinnacle of selling, not just selling a product, but helping customers become better versions of themselves through a smart conversation, at the right time, in the right way. And if you ask what would happen if all of us started acting like challengers in our work, in our leadership, in our lives, the answer is, the world would have more courageous organizations, more insightful individuals, and more conversations that, while not easy, are absolutely essential. Dare to step into those conversations and start with a question the customer has never dared to ask themselves. Thank you for patiently joining me until the final page of The Challenger. If you've been with me from the first chapters, you've probably realized that this isn't a sales training book in the usual sense. This is an interrogation, an experiment both incisive and honest, about how humans persuade humans in a world that has changed too quickly for our own reflexive instincts. We no longer live in an era where products lead the way. We live amidst an information flood where everyone knows, but very few dare to think differently. In this context, if the salesperson still holds any role, it must be to reactivate the buyer's thinking, forcing them to reconsider, to question, and to dare to bet on a future they hadn't planned for. And if, after all this, what remains in you isn't just the teach, tailor, control models, but a more persistent question, do I have the courage not to pander to the market, but to challenge it? Then I believe we've arrived exactly where this book intended to take you. If you found this summary offered you a new perspective, a different frame of reference, or if you believe it needs to be challenged, I encourage you to leave a review or comment. Not for us to measure success, but so that those who come after you won't embark on this journey alone. And if you have a book that haunts you, or one you wouldn't dare read alone because it touches too deeply on conventional thought structures, please suggest it to me. I will go through it with you, chapter by chapter, with all the necessary clarity and respect for knowledge untainted by presentation techniques. Once again, thank you for choosing to listen. Goodbye and see you next time.